It started the way most things in my life started, with something humming in my sock drawer. I ignored it at first, which given my history was a bold choice. Last time I ignored a humming sound, it turned out to be a misplaced calm crystal that ended up melting through 3 shirts, my floor tile, and precisely 1 cup of very hot coffee. I was told afterward the cup was irreplaceable. So were the pants I was wearing. But this hum had a melody to it. Not exactly a tune, more like a persuasive suggestion from a well-meaning AI that had taken a poetry elective. It got louder every time I tried to sleep. By the 4th hour, my bed had synced with the hum and was vibrating to the beat like an over-enthusiastic nightclub in orbit. When I finally opened the drawer, there it was. A crystal, dull and squat, and shaped like something designed by an alien jeweler who specialized in brooding. It blinked twice, then spoke in a voice that sounded suspiciously like my alien friend Leray trying to impersonate an aristocrat. "You are summoned. Try to dress like a person this time." The crystal's glow pulsed warmly, like it was proud of itself. I stared at it, then at the socks. One of them blinked back. It was possible the humming had scrambled my reality sensors again. I muttered something unrepeatable, stuffed the crystal in my pocket, and walked straight into my closet door. Smooth, elegant, practically a diplomatic gesture in my culture. Later, over what passed for coffee on Virelon Station, half caffeine, half mystery, I confronted Leray in the Habitat Commons. She was lounging like she'd invented comfort, her long ears twitching slightly, which either meant she was nervous or trying not to laugh. Knowing her, both. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Did your mother just summon me?" Leary tilted her head. "I said invited." The crystal said summoned. "Well, it loses a little in translation." "That's not a little. That's an intergalactic leap, a chasm." "Semantics," she said, and took a sip from her own drink, which hissed ominously. "Semantics is my job." "No," she corrected. "Your job is telling people how bad they are at semantics while accidentally insulting them in 7 dialects. Once, I insulted one matriarch once, and she laughed. She fainted, Theo. From joy. From rage." I rubbed my temples. "Why does your mother want to meet me?" "She's curious," Leary said slowly. "She thinks you're interesting. That's what people say right before dissecting frogs. Relax. If she wanted to dissect you, she'd at least buy you dinner first." That was not as comforting as she intended. Leary had the kind of sense of humor that could best be described as culturally disorienting. I once saw her convince an ambassador that smiling meant you were about to challenge someone to a duel. He spent 2 weeks walking around with a grimace like he'd eaten his own shoes. Still, I agreed. Not because I was brave, because saying no to an Alari matriarch's invitation felt like the diplomatic equivalent of kicking a beehive into a volcano. Plus, Leary promised me the food would be better than anything on Virelon, which was a low bar, given that the last cafeteria meal tried to bite me. The shuttle to Alarian was sleek, silver, and full of things that whispered when I wasn't looking. The AI pilot was named Trillium and introduced herself by asking me to confess my deepest regret. I told her about a sandwich I dropped in college, and she said, "That explains your aura." I didn't ask. Leary was oddly quiet during the ride, her fingers drumming against her seat's armrest in a rhythm that sounded like Morse code for "do not freak out." I was naturally already freaking out. When we landed, Alarian took my breath away. Literally. The air was rich in something my lungs weren't used to, and I had to gasp like a fish for a good 5 minutes before the adaptive filter in my collar adjusted. After that, though, it was beautiful. Sprawling structures that glowed faintly in the dusk, trees with leaves like shimmering glass, and streets paved with stone that played soft notes as you walked. Each step a chord in a slowly evolving planetary melody. Leray called it resonant urban design. I called it trippy. We were met by a procession of what I assumed were house staff, but could easily have been an orchestra or possibly a very fashion-forward security team. One of them handed me a towel. It had an embroidered warning, "Do not insult the curtains." I asked Leary. She just smiled and said, "You'll see." Melanie, Leary's mother, was waiting in the inner garden. Regal wasn't the word. Majestic, maybe. Terrifying, definitely. She was taller than Lyrae by a head, her skin the same pale opal hue, her hair done in cascading braids that shimmered like starlight. Her ears bore more rings than Saturn. Each one chimed softly when she moved. She studied me the way a scholar studies an ancient puzzle, or a cat eyes a laser pointer. Well, that's a relief, I said, and immediately stepped on a vine that screamed. Just a short, high-pitched eep. I jumped. Lyrae snorted behind me. Sensitive flora, Melani said calmly. Do not walk angry. They get startled. I'll walk cheerfully next time. Good. We dine at first moon. She glided away. I turned to Lyrae. She's going to eat me, isn't she? Lyrae looked genuinely amused. Number, but she might ask why you smell like ionized detergent. That's my cologne. That explains a lot. And that was how my first day began on Alarion. With a cursed sock drawer, a humming rock, one nearly offended matriarch, and a plant that now had a grudge against me. I had no idea what Melani really wanted, but I was starting to think the reason I was invited here wasn't just tea and small talk. Something was humming beneath the surface, and it wasn't coming from my socks this time. Dinner began with a gong. Not just any gong, a hovering, translucent orb that vibrated until it emitted a sound like an interstellar whale clearing its throat after a cold shower. It floated just outside the grand hall entrance and burped politely each time a guest entered. I was told it was called a resonance announcer, but I was fairly certain someone made that up to avoid admitting their culture used sentient soup bowls for social cues. Lyrae led me into the hall with the confident grace of someone who had absolutely not told me the dress code. I was wearing a slightly rumpled formal jacket and pants that had never quite adjusted to this planet's gravity. She wore her usual armored clothing, cleaned and polished to a mirror sheen, with a single pin shaped like a spiral galaxy on her collar. It pulsed gently, like it was trying to send me a message in Morse code. Probably, you're underdressed. The dining room was oval, vast, and alive. The ceiling rippled like water reflecting stars. The walls adjusted their opacity depending on the volume of the conversation. When someone laughed too loud, the room dimmed slightly as if to say, "Calm down, we're not animals." The table was long enough to require a minor shuttle to reach the other end, but only 6 people sat there. Melani, 3 other Ellery dignitaries, Lyrae, and me. A suspiciously small crowd for such an intimidating hall. "Welcome," Melani said, gesturing for me to sit to her left. "This evening is for honesty and palate expansion." "That sounds ominous," I said, seating myself cautiously. "It means you may learn truths you were not prepared for," she said. "Still ominous." The first course was served by a being who had no feet and glided across the floor as though skating on light. They set a glowing plate in front of me. It looked like a jellyfish, smelled like citrus, and made a faint whimpering noise when I picked up my fork. "It is not sentient," one of the dignitaries said before I could ask. "Only recently deceased," added another. I put down the fork. Lyrae leaned in. "You're making the traditional first-course face." "What face is that?" "Panic with a side of social anxiety." "I've been practicing." "Clearly." I finally took a bite. Surprisingly delicious, like star fruit and toasted hazelnuts, with a hint of regret. I tried not to think about the whimper. As we ate, conversation floated around the table, light and probing. The dignitaries asked questions in the style of philosophers who didn't want answers, only more elegant questions. Melani remained quiet, observing, occasionally sipping from a cup that changed color every time she looked at me. "Your nervous system is interesting," she said abruptly. "I get that a lot," I replied, usually during medical scans. "You have resistance to certain neural harmonics, rare, possibly inherited." "I once got hit by lightning," I offered helpfully. "That may also explain it." Melani's gaze shifted to Lyrae. "Did you tell him why he is truly here?" Lyrae coughed. "I thought it'd be more fun if he figured it out himself." "Fun," Melani echoed, like it was a word she'd only recently added to her vocabulary. The second course arrived in a floating bowl that rearranged its contents whenever I looked directly at it. The others seemed to eat without issue. Mine briefly morphed into a face that resembled my 5th-grade math teacher before turning into something neon and crunchy. I ate. It tasted like confusion and victory. The conversation turned toward language. Do you believe in universal semantics? One of the elders asked me. Absolutely not, I said. If there were, I wouldn't have accidentally proposed to a Zarnakian customs officer last year. You did what? Leary asked, choking on her drink. In my defense, I thought Gurak Tum meant thank you. Apparently it's closer to I submit my heart and internal organs to your lineage. The elder nodded solemnly. A noble sacrifice. I ran. He cried. It was a weird Tuesday. Even Milani smiled at that. Briefly, the room's walls brightened half a shade, indicating a rise in positive social energy. I was getting the hang of this. Dessert arrived in the form of a sphere that hovered over the plate. You had to inhale it, not eat it. One dignitary passed out from joy. I sneezed and saw my childhood. Twice. After the meal, we moved to a softer chamber, circular and filled with floating cushions and subtle, directionless music that seemed to be coming from the floor. A tray of post-dinner mints hovered near us, rotating slowly like they were enjoying the atmosphere. I took one. It whispered something about my posture. Melani turned to me again. You're not just a friend to my daughter, you are a variable. Thank you. A variable in a system long believed stable. A perturbation. You're really good at compliments. She means, Leray said, that you've done something unusual. What? Exist? You bonded with our language too well. Emotionally. I blinked. I do love good verbs. Ellery language has resonance threads, Melani explained. Most species process them. You absorb them. I'm a sponge. You're a mirror, she corrected. And perhaps a key. There was a silence filled only by ambient floor music. I ate another mint out of nervous habit. It sighed. Okay, I said. So I'm a linguistic mirror key. What's the lock? Melanie didn't answer. Instead, she stood and gestured for me to follow her to an adjacent chamber. It was a room filled with light. No source. Just light. And in the center, a sculpture. No, not a sculpture. A symbol. Twisting lines of energy, vibrating slowly in the air, suspended between nothing and nothing. It hummed in a tone I felt more than heard, somewhere in my teeth. It's a cultural cipher, Leray said beside me. Thousands of years old, unreadable, unsingable. Until you arrived, Melani finished. When you spoke at dinner, it changed. I swallowed. I just made a joke about Zarnakian mating customs. You aligned a dormant thread, by accident. Of course, that's how I do everything important. Melani reached out and touched the symbol. It pulsed in response like it recognized her. Then it dimmed. You may be the bridge, she said softly, but bridges can be burned or built. That's ominous again. Leray looked at me, ears angled strangely. She means, we think you're part of something bigger. Maybe with me. Maybe because of me. Because we're friends? Because of how we're friends. And suddenly the air in the room wasn't just bioluminescent. It was charged, heavy with something unsaid. I tried to joke, tried to say something clever, but my mouth refused to play along. In the end, I said the only thing that felt true. I'm still not sure if this is a dream, a prank, or an accidental engagement ceremony. Melani smiled. Possibly all three. I woke up in a room I didn't recognize, which by now was less alarming than it should have been. The walls were humming softly in what sounded like a lullaby. The ceiling rotated gently, displaying constellations that weren't mine. And a small orb floated beside my bed, whispering compliments about my breathing rhythm. You possess admirable pulmonary patterns, it said in a tone that was almost flirty. Thanks, I muttered. You're not so bad yourself. My shoes were missing. My dignity, however, remained, barely, clinging to the end of my sleep tunic like a cat who regretted jumping. There was a note glowing on the table. No words, just a resonance pulse. When I touched it, it translated in my head. The cipher has changed again. Meet us in the archive. Bring your linguistic instincts. And don't touch any fruit on the way. One of them bit the ambassador. I found my shoes 3 minutes later, embedded in the ceiling. I didn't ask. I just climbed the wall, muttering about alien gravity and vengeful footwear, and hoped the orb wouldn't record the moment for future blackmail. The archive was different this time. It had rearranged itself. Apparently, Alari architecture was prone to moods, and today it had decided to feel enigmatic. The walls twisted subtly inward. The light shimmered as though passing through water. In the center of the room stood the cipher again, except now it was moving on its own, weaving threads of language and sound in the air. Milani was already there, her long fingers tracing invisible lines. Leary stood off to the side, arms crossed, ears tilted in an expression I'd come to understand as a mixture of worry and mild embarrassment. "You changed it again," she said, "without doing anything." "I sneezed." "That counts." Milani stepped forward. "The cipher has not shifted in over 1,000 cycles. Your presence unlocks more than meaning. It alters the structure." "That sounds like I'm breaking it." "You're engaging with it," she corrected, "like a song that finds its melody only when you hum without realizing." "I'm not humming." "You are internally." "Well," I said, "that's alarming." Leary joined us near the cipher. "We think it's tied to your perception. Something about how humans contextualize contradiction. We call it winging it." "Precisely." The cipher pulsed again, and a new pattern formed. This one had colors. Colors I couldn't name, twisting in mathematical shapes that looked like laughter and grief dancing at a wedding. A low note resonated in my chest. Not unpleasant, but insistent. Melani narrowed her eyes. "It's giving us a location." "A place?" "No," Leray said slowly. "A memory, one not bound by a single species." I stepped forward without thinking. The air thickened. The cipher expanded. For a moment, I wasn't in the room. I was in a corridor of shifting stone. Leary beside me, but older, tired. Somewhere ahead, Melani was arguing with someone I couldn't see, her voice urgent, fearful. The walls bled light. The atmosphere was wrong. Too hot, too quiet, too final. Then it collapsed. I fell backward into myself, gasping. Leary caught me. "You saw it too?" "Yeah," I said. "Time had stage fright. That's one way to put it." Melani was looking at me differently now, not like a puzzle, more like a book she'd thought was lost, now rediscovered on the wrong shelf. "You were meant to be here," she said softly. "Not by fate, by consequence." That was scarier. The next few days were a blur of testing, translating, and me insisting I needed at least 1 hour a day where no one asked me to realign a cosmic artifact with my subconscious. The cipher continued to evolve. Each interaction brought out new patterns. Fragments of forgotten culture, snippets of shared history between the Alari, and something else, something older, perhaps even human. We found recordings embedded in the resonance, a voice that resembled Lyray's but wasn't, an ancestor, a future echo. She spoke of bridges between species, of songs woven across worlds, of trust born not from treaties, but from absurd, accidental friendship. Leary and I spent long hours trying to interpret it. "It's talking about cultural merging," she said, "but metaphorically, through food, art, language, even awkward misunderstandings." "That's my specialty," I said. "I'm basically a walking diplomatic incident." She laughed genuinely. "You've helped more than you know." "I've also insulted your wall plants, twice. They forgave you." Their leaves curled into a rude gesture. "That's forgiveness in plant speak." I smiled. For the first time I felt, not alien, still weird, but accepted. In the final week, Milani hosted a gathering, not formal, not diplomatic, just a convergence of people who had interacted with the cipher. Stories were told, jokes exchanged. Food was less emotionally traumatic. Someone even performed a comedy routine in 6 languages at once, including one that used only eyebrow movements. Before I left, Milani took me aside. "You brought something we didn't expect," she said. "Not knowledge, not power, perspective." "I brought confusion," I replied. "Precisely. Confusion leads to questions. Questions lead to change." "I also brought an allergic reaction to your desserts." That was instructive for our chefs. She held out a hand, not formal, not royal, just human-shaped in its intent. I shook it. You may return when you wish, she said. Your presence is now a thread in our song. I nodded, unsure what to say. Then Lyrae appeared with my bag. My real bag, not the one full of confiscated planetary brochures and a towel that had somehow declared independence. You ready? She asked. Do I have a choice? Always, that's why it matters. We boarded the shuttle. As it lifted, a Larian shimmered below, the structures humming faintly, the city playing its music, the cipher's melody embedded somewhere in the wind. I looked at Lyrae. So, your mom still thinks I'm interesting? She thinks you're unpredictable. That's rarer. I'll take it. You better, she said, grinning. You're part of our weird now. As the stars stretched into lines, I sat back, exhaled, and thought about how far I'd come, from sock drawer summons to unlocking alien memories with badly timed jokes. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was a bridge, a variable, a friend. And for once, that was enough.